Hey, welcome back to Lick of the Week. Last video we looked at taking a song like 9-Pound Hammer and figuring out the chord progression. We also kind of looked at exactly what a chord progression is and how it relates to the key that you're playing in. For this video I'd like to transpose the song 9-Pound Hammer to the key of D. The key of D tends to be a key that's kind of hard for some players to play in, especially if you're new to the banjo. But if you understand how these chord progressions work and you're familiar with the chord shapes on the banjo, there's really no reason you should be intimidated by playing in the key of D. It's really not any harder to play in D than it is to play in G or A or F once you understand how the fingerboard works. Now, the typical way to play in the key of D for most people who are not really familiar with playing in that key is to grab the capo, put it at the 2nd fret, play out of a C position. Now, just saying that sounds confusing to me. Capo, 2nd fret, C position. So automatically saying C, 2nd position, capo, key of D, the terminology tends to sound kind of fuzzy and confusing to me. What I teach my beginning students to do is to understand the fingerboard in natural terms, which equals chords as they naturally appear on the fingerboard, not being altered by a capo or any other kind of device. And again, I'm not anti-capo, but it's far better, I think, for you to understand how chords function, where they're at on the neck, without a capo, and then start to use a capo, and then you'll really understand exactly what the capo's doing for you. So we'll save the capo for later in a future video about how it affects these key changes. Right now, let's just play 9-Pound Hammer in the key of D without the capo. So what we need to do is establish the chord progression. Now, we already know what the chord progression is for 9-Pound Hammer from the previous video. It's a 1, 4, 1, 5 chord progression. And we've already discovered how many beats or measures each chord change lasts. So we really have everything we need to know to play 9-Pound Hammer in any key. Especially, the keys that we're used to playing in this kind of music. So D is a common key. It may not be that common to play 9-Pound Hammer in the key of D, but who knows, you may be in a band where the vocalist decides they can sing it better in D. You may be in a jam session where somebody just wants to play that song in D. So not only will you play fiddle tunes in D, but you could play a lot of unexpected songs in the key of D, because that's just how life is. You don't always get things like you want them. So let's start with the premise of how would I play in the key of D? How would I transpose the key of G over to the key of D and play songs there? How would I take 9-Pound Hammer and move it to the key of D? Well, again, you'll have to use just a little bit of theory, which is just meaning you just have to have a basic understanding of how these chords work. So let's look at the key of D as a scale. Just like we did for the key of G, we have a certain set of notes that we use to make our chords play melodies with. The key of D is this scale: D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and then another D gets you into the next octave. So those 7 notes, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, are the building blocks for the chords in the key of D, and they're the notes you use to solo with. So those are your melody building blocks. So just like we did for the key of G, let's use the natural number system and the classical Roman numeral idea to map out the chord changes, because here's how it works. No matter what major key you're talking about, the 1 chord is major, 2 is usually minor, 3 is usually minor, 4 is usually major. So what we're going to do is change the names of the chords that are going to appear because we're in a different key, but how they function in a song, being major and minor, won't change. So we have D major as the 1 chord. The 2 chord is E, and it's usually a minor, which would be E minor. Right? The 3 chord, D, E, is F sharp, is the 3rd note. F sharp would be F sharp minor usually. Not always, but usually. Okay, the 4 chord is G, which is a major chord. The 5 chord would be A, which is major. The 6th chord would be represented by B, and it's almost always a minor, B minor. And then C sharp is the last note, but remember, without getting into any deep discussions about modes and why this is, just accept it for now that the 7th note of the scale is usually diminished or dropped down a half step. So instead of C sharp major, we'd have a normal C chord. So the most naturally occurring, the most logical chords to use to play backup in the key of D will be D, E minor, F sharp minor, G, A, B minor, and C. But again now, you could be playing in the key of D and there are chords that will creep in that go outside of this. Some of the minor chords may wind up being major, and that goes into modes and things, which I'm not going to get into in these videos. But these are the chords that are the most logical and, you know, will appear a lot. So what we need to do now is plug in the information from 9-pound hammer 1, 4, 1, 5 and apply it to the key of D and figure out what the names of the chords are now in D. We know the chord progression is always the same no matter what key you move it to, no matter how you transpose it. So all we have to do now is plug in those new scale notes. The 1 chord would be D. The 5 chord would be D, E, F sharp, G, the 4 chord, G would be 4. And we know the song goes back to 1, which is D. And then the 5 chord appears in the key of D, that would be an A. And then back to the 1 chord. So now we have all the chord names we need, D, G, D, and A, back to D. Now all we need to do is plug in the right number of beats for each chord change, and voila, we have transposed 9-pound hammer from the key of G over to the key of D without the capo. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Well, roll, buddy, with your lower coal. How can I roll when the wheels won't go? So it wasn't really any harder to play 9-pound hammer rhythmically in the key of D than it was the key of G. Now, if you're trying to take a solo, well, that could be a little different ball of wax because you're using different positions. The capo sometimes can make it easier to solo in the key of D if you use a capo, but really if you get really comfortable with the chord shapes and how they function and you use a little bit of that theory to help you understand what's going on, chances are you'll rely less and less on the capo. And the nice thing about being able to play in the key of D without the capo is you're not dependent on it, and you have some pretty nice open strings. You can play an A here, which you normally, you know, the capo's being held by. You could go behind the capo and find some cool chromatic notes. There's a lot of things you can do without the capo that you can't do with it. So, and again, we're trying to think of these chords in natural terms, which means just to understand how all these chords work without capo, which is the best way to learn these things, I think. So we have 9-pound hammer moved to the key of D. What I'd like to do in the next video is move this tune to the key of C maybe, or the key of F. We'll just keep transposing these over to other keys, and after a while you'll start to really understand this pattern, and it's all based on logic. And once you can get a hold of this logic and grasp onto it and start using it and applying it to what you're doing, chances are you won't be intimidated by playing in the key of D anymore, because it'll just be another key that you play in. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.